The Vail Dance Festival returns to the stage July 29th through August 9th. Conversations on Dance returns for a fifth year to bring audiences behind the curtain and closer to the festival artists they love. Our live podcast recordings have just been announced and will be running from July 30th through August 9th, totaling 10 events. Guests include Justin Peck, Sarah Mearns, Pam Tanowitz, Caroline Shaw, Lauren Lovett, and many others. I will be on maternity leave this summer. These live events will be hosted by Michael with special guest hosts throughout the festival. Tickets are on sale now and can be purchased at vaildance.org/conversations-on-dance or click the link in the description of this episode. Be sure to subscribe to Conversations on Dance wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss any of the content coming from the Vail Dance Festival. I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance.
Today we are happy to welcome back Principal Guest Conductor for the San Francisco Ballet, Ming Luke. We had a fascinating conversation with Ming back in September 2020 in episode 203, where we dive into his background and career as a conductor. Ming has a wealth of knowledge in music and dance history, as he has a background in dance himself and has conducted for ballet all around the world. In light of the 50th anniversary of the Stravinsky Festival, we have Ming on to talk about the relationship between composers and choreographers, dating back to Tchaikovsky and Petipa through to present-day collaborations. Hi, Ming. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you back on the podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
So The last time we spoke with you, we were just talking before we started, was in episode 203 in September of 2020. So in the throes of the pandemic for sure. So hopefully we can look at it in a different place now that we've been back on stage and all of that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The ballet just finished their season, so we're recovering.
Yeah, you guys were doing a ton of stuff. I was seeing on Instagram, you were conducting Swan Lake and all of that. I'm sure you're like, I do that all the time nowadays.
Yeah, Thomason's is retiring, artistic director for San Francisco Ballet. So it was a pretty momentous season. But I think the thing that threw us off guard a little bit was we thought we'd ease back into performances, I think, for pandemic, and it basically went from 0 to 100.
Right.
And I think the stamina, at least my stamina, was an issue for a little while. So getting back into 100% performing and to every weekend rehearsals and everything was a change. Welcome change, but still.
Yeah. Can you actually tell us a little bit about that? I think like Michael and I as dancers, we obviously are thinking like how the dancers are feeling to go from 0 to 100. But what is that like for you and for the orchestra? And how do you kind of like build up that stamina if you can when it's happening so fast, I suppose?
For us, the physical aspect is not insignificant as well, right?
Right.
So, especially for players, there's a big tendency for injuries. Most musicians actually have recovered from injuries, just like, dancers or whatnot. There's a lot of stress issues. And if you play an instrument like a violin, where your hand and arm is actually wrapped around the instrument, there's a lot of twisting. So
Tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Any little, unwanted tension is actually will create big issues. But for conductors, the same thing. We use batons because batons are more efficient. Instead of using a whole elbow motion or arm motion, you're only using your wrists sometimes for some of the sort of medium or small gestures. So there's an efficiency aspect to that. But when you're conducting something like Swan Lake, which is like a 3-hour program, the fatigue is still an issue, and that's not small music. That's big, intense, grandiose, wonderful. And so it's hard not to get swept up, but then at the same time, you're sort of expending more energy as well.
Sure.
Right. I mean, certainly, anyone that's gone to see, the symphony, those musicians are sweating. Everyone is involved. It's not like you can just sit there and sort of like placidly play Rachmaninoff's first piano concerto.
Yeah, exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Ballets, we just flat out say, oh, that's a sweaty one. So
Oh, that's funny.
I love that. Yeah.
We
That's
say we say puffy, like that's a puffy one, right, Michael? Like it makes us like
Yeah.
tired, or that's funny.
Mhm.
And then I also wonder too, like for dancers, when we're tired, we can mark things or kind of like go through the motions. Do you guys have like a similar kind of? Probably not so much, huh?
We do to some extent. For instance, brass players, especially if you have a dress rehearsal before the concert that evening, they might just drop their dynamic. So instead of playing fortissimo at the grand, climax or whatnot, they'll just sort of drop the dynamic quite a bit. For most orchestral players, obviously, you can't just like stop playing because then everything sort of falls apart or it's not really there. But if you're a soloist, like a violinist or a singer, especially singers will often mark. They might just not sing, or they might just almost whisper just to save their voices. And for conductors, there is you can decide to be less physically engaged to try to save energy too. And then, like if you're doing, Martin West, the music director at San Francisco Ballet, was talking about when he was at English National Ballet, ENB, and they used to do like Swan Lake 8 times a week. I mean, the same amount of energy for each one. And so he said he learned early sort of the pacing and the phrasing and how to sort of have an overall arc for the entire ballet, instead of just, every single moment having huge grandiose gestures and kind of will the music out, the baton.
Sure.
That's so cool. I this is something I'd never actually considered seriously. I mean, I guess that's not true. We remember when Francisco, our pianist in Miami, he had to do a triple bill in Paris that was Tchaikovsky's second piano concerto. Who's the composer of Viscera? Lowell Lieberman's first piano concerto. And and In the Night, which is Chopin. And he was like, In the Night is just like for he's like, Chopin is definitely the rest. But he's just on like every single it was just and that triple bill,
That's huge. That's a huge program. It's funny because most times for concertos, if it's an instrument that's in the orchestra and is a player in the orchestra, they'll take off the rest of the concert because, a concerto itself, it takes so much energy. And so to have a triple bill of 3 major, that's a fantastic feat, I should say.
Yeah. And he did it like multiple times. I mean, he's a superhero, and he was like the only one too. Like we always wondered that too. We're like, does he have like a cover? Do you have a second cast in case? What happened?
Gosh, what would you do? Yeah. If you got sick or something. Yeah. Well
No. I was just going to say, we're talking about Swan Lake, which is a great segue into what we kind of decided we would chat with you about today, because you have such an incredible knowledge of not just music and dance, but also some history included in both of those art forms. So we wanted to talk today a little bit about the relationship between composers and choreographers. And eventually we will get to Stravinsky and Balanchine, kind of to celebrate the Stravinsky Festival, the celebration that's going on right now at New York City Ballet, just for fun. Because, we thought, why not dive into that? Our listeners have been asking for some dance history, so here we are. So let's talk a little bit about those early relationships between, like, I think, Michael, you wanted to start right with some Petipa and Tchaikovsky and kind of what those earlier relationships, music and dance, looked like.
Yeah, for Tchaikovsky is one of the most influential composers for ballet because he sort of transformed what music was supposed to be for ballet. I think before that, not to knock the composers before that, like make us our favorite, ballet composers, but the music was more almost like a canvas on top of which the dances, place on. And so, the music could be a little less developed and could be highly manipulated to whatever the dancer's needs are, whether it's just music that suddenly is 50% faster or slower or whatnot. But Tchaikovsky sort of really married the idea of an orchestral sound, a very symphonic, sweeping, full musical experience with the dance too. And so putting them on equal partners. So Petipa and Tchaikovsky, that connection that they had is just fantastic. And, as they're in the middle of creating these works, their relationship and the way they would talk to each other and to make requests for each other were just really wonderful. Like, in in some parts of like Sleeping Beauty or whatnot, they'd actually have Petipa would have requests for Tchaikovsky to say, it'd be really great if you could do this or this structure, or these various elements in Sleeping Beauty which really come through. So for a lot of us, Tchaikovsky as a phenomenal composer, really having that depth of music added to ballet is really just a major turning point. And so, like a lot of these collaborations, you're talking about the Stravinsky Festival, Balanchine, Stravinsky, two of the best pairings of movement and music, composer and choreographer. Their relationship was so fantastic and tight, and I think it's because for both of them, Stravinsky, his big start was in ballet. I think he was like 5 or something like that. He saw his first ballet and was just completely influenced. Actually, it was Sleeping Beauty,
Wow.
and he, was just highly influenced. And then, of course, Firebird was his huge breakout success. And so, he really got his start in ballet, loved it as an art form, and obviously, composed many, many works that are very famous. Rite of Spring, of course, caused the huge riots or whatnot. But we forget, I think, sometimes too, that like Balanchine, he had a musical background. He studied music. He made his own piano reductions, and so, it's very different that he had such an intimate knowledge of music. And so I think the two of them really connected together in, they really felt like they understood each other, for a level.
Yeah.
So in the 19th century, would that have been uncommon? Like Petipa, for instance, or Ivanov, like did they have a musical background, or were they kind of, directing merely from their choreographic viewpoint?
Yeah, it changed a lot. Sometimes, the choreography would be done absent of music anyway, and they just find out what the music is, right? And so even with Stravinsky, with the Ballet Russe, that would actually happen at some points, and they're just like, well, this music just doesn't work for this, But the relationship between Petipa and Tchaikovsky, really to that intimate level where they could actually make requests and alter things along the way, I think is a really big change. And so, it's really, I think it's, and it's still funny today because people still debate, as a conductor working with different companies, you have different viewpoints from different choreographers about what the role of the music is. Some people just ignore the dance whatsoever. I just want to, just pick a tempo and it'll be fine. And, for me, I tend to like a little bit more intimate connection because, if you're looking at, to me, it's like an opera singer. Like you can tell when an opera singer is running out of breath. He doesn't let the audience know, but the conductor should know. And the same thing too, if you're doing like for Swan Lake, the fortes, and you can see that, they're falling behind a little bit, maybe that's actually okay because you're trying to drive and push them. But if music is falling behind, that's death. Right. Music is falling behind, and the music is slower than what they're doing. Then they have to make. You can tell when they make the decision. Do I just ignore the music and just push through, or am I going to try to compromise it and try to be on the music? So if a conductor doesn't know that, then we do actually help and assist and try to actually to keep things together and try to make the dancer as comfortable as possible. But they're one of my favorite choreographers, Kathy Marston. We were talking about one scene in Snowblind, a new ballet she created on San Francisco Ballet, and she said, I don't actually want you to think about tempo or anything. What I told the dancers is that I want this emotion to come through, and for the music, that's what we need to do. We just need that emotion to come through, and if those emotions line up, then that's great. And so I think, the relationships between musicians and dancers, it really just depends on what their backgrounds are, what they're looking for, what they're inspired by. But I mean, when you have people like Petipa and Tchaikovsky, two of the greats, really working together equals. And then same thing with Balanchine and Stravinsky. I mean, I love when Balanchine talks about the idea that, he didn't want to distract from the music. He wants to reflect the music, right?
Right.
And so sometimes he's like, the choreography is too much, that's just way too much. You want something that's a little bit leaner and really, really represents the music. And then on the flip side, Stravinsky would go to Balanchine and say, you know what, your choreography, helps me like understand the music, it's absolutely amazing how well they're paired together, visually and orally.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder how much information we have about the way the process worked in terms of Tchaikovsky and Petipa together. How many changes were made like in real time on stage, right before the premiere of a production, maybe even afterwards? Do we have any indications of that, especially in such a collaborative process? You would think maybe that might be the case, or maybe was it just like cut and dry? Here's what Tchaikovsky gave us. That's the music.
No, they were constantly adjusting. I mean, the fun thing is that you have in letters and notes and everything, the actual adjustments and requirements and whatnot. But just like most composers nowadays that are writing for ballet, you'll get a list of what the scenes are, what the various scenarios are, what the sort of the arc of the ballet is, and so when that's then the composer creates the music on that. And so that's, I think, where Tchaikovsky started. But then as they go through back and forth, they actually start to say, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm going to use this piece over here. I'm going to actually alter this ending. And then, for things, especially like Swan Lake, there's multiple, obviously, arrangements and alterations that happen to it, depending on who's actually setting it on top of Petipa's original.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, there's that story. I forget which direction this was in, but Tchaikovsky Potida originally written for Swan Lake. But I don't remember if that was it the original music or it was something that was added later when a ballerina was dissatisfied with what Tchaikovsky composed. So he was like, okay, I'll make you another Potida.
Yeah. So exactly. So they just got excerpted out completely. Something else was replaced and it became its own ballet. Which is fantastic. Yeah.
Right.
Do we know how Balanchine became aware of that extra bit of music that was hiding that gem? For Tchaikovsky Potida, sorry.
I actually don't.
That'd be cool to find out.
There's this fun story it could be apocryphal. I mean, it could just be made up, but for Symphony in C, that somebody suggested that he actually he choreograph a work to Symphony in C, but he didn't realize that they were talking about the Stravinsky. And so that's how the Bizet, because the Bizet was just discovered around that time. They're just like, oh, okay, so this must be what people are talking about. And it was originally, that's why Symphony C is the Bizet, not the Stravinsky. So
right.
Funny.
Yeah, and Bizet was incredibly young when he wrote Symphony in C.
Oh yeah, it was annoying. It was like he was like 17 or something.
I think he was 17.
Yeah, and it's fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. But there's so many composers that like Mendelssohn. He was 17 when he wrote Midsummer Night's Dream, and but he was also one of those geniuses that also had incredible means. They had a professional orchestra at their house literally every single week, so that he and his siblings, his sister Fanny, could compose for them. And so there are these amazing string symphonies of Mendelssohn that were written when he was a teenager, and they're just fantastic. They're just fantastic. So
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So cool.
But that access is everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have Berlioz, who didn't have anything, but I think he had a broken guitar, but he still had a mind that was amazing as a composer. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was the general vibe, maybe you could tell us pre and post Tchaikovsky amongst composers? Would that have been like a lesser thing to be participating in the ballet? It's like, oh, I got to compose this ballet. I'll give my worst.
I it's funny because I think each country generally has a different order of what they which is more important, like ballet. Right. Opera versus symphonic, right. And so in Russia, obviously ballet is one of the top things, right? They still have ballerinas, handing out awards because, of course, you'd have a celebrity handing out like, let's have a ballerina, right. And it's like ballet, chess, etc. But I don't think for composers. First of all, composers throughout the eras, they're just thankful for work. Right. So I don't know if it's that they necessarily resent it, but I think that it's not necessarily you're creating music to be of service, and so I think that Tchaikovsky really turned the tables to see how the music could be of service instead of just providing a beat, right?
Right.
instead of just providing a beat and sort of a general background, like a background color, it was like an entire painting in which that, like people are actually choreographing to. And so I don't necessarily think that they would resent it or not be engaged by it. Just like, if you're a bar pianist like Brahms was, all the stuff that he used to play in the bars and the brothels, it actually ended up influencing a lot of his other music. And so it was, I think, really influential. I mean, like, I think it's, I don't know. I still think it would be fun. I mean, like, I would love to compose for ballet. I'm not a composer.
It's funny though. I can see, like, that's a great question, because I can see also, I don't know, but I could imagine a composer being like, oh, I have to work with someone who's going to give me direction on things to do instead of just like realizing my specific vision. So I can see how it takes probably a special personalities to work together in that way and be willing to collaborate.
Yeah. Bernstein mentioned the first time that he composed for film, that his heart was destroyed because, on the floor, because they needed to cut it up and, say, hey, like, the scene is actually 3-4 minutes shorter. So we're just going to take some of this music, add some of this music and whatnot. And but he completely understood. He said, like, I really understand that this is what's needed, but I didn't create this. And it was really terrifying. And Prokofiev, on the other hand, there was a work of his that was created for that. The music was used for film, but they respected him so much that they just altered the film to fit the music.
Wow.
Right?
Oh, wow.
Which you never hear.
Okay.
I
have a question, because was he a picky guy? Is that like, is that out of respect or fear? Just because I know, the story of Prodigal Son is that he hated it, and that's why Balanchine never made another ballet to his work, and complained about him later through life.
He was a little bit of a, it's funny because he had a relatively hard time. Like most of the Russians do with government, right? Like, that's the whole thing you hear about Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Balanchine, and obviously Stravinsky. They left Russia, right? And so meeting up in Paris and everything. So, Prokofiev was he was like a lot of those really big prodigies. He was sort of an enfant terrible. He was very well regarded, but he also had a very inflated sense of self, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that he got beaten down quite a bit because he was trying to navigate the politics and was successful sometimes and really wasn't other times. I think it's a little, I think that composers can be very temperamental. You just depends on the person whether they're accommodating or not. Technically, right? Stravinsky and Balanchine only commissioned Stravinsky like 3 or 4 times, right? I think it's 4 technically, but he used obviously his music, which is pre-existing music all the time. But for Agon, Balanchine actually went to Stravinsky and said, "Hey, can we just have a little bit more music here? It'd be really great to extend this." And instead of reacting negatively to it, Stravinsky, he slightly negatively, but he was just like, you tell me literally how many seconds I will compose for you, exactly that amount, right?
Isn't there a video of this? It's super cute. It's so charming. Yeah.
And it's really fun because, like, again, he didn't say, no, you can't, you're just going to have to deal with it. He just basically was flexible enough. And again, their admiration for each other is just unparalleled. So.
Right. He's just being cheeky. He's like, okay, tell me how much you want. And then I think Balanchine's like, okay, 2 minutes, 20 seconds. He's like, are you sure it's not 19? I'm going to make it, or they start like sort of bargaining, and it's a fun thing to see. But let's go back in the wake of the Tchaikovsky Petipa collaborative artistic output. Would you say that changed things? Because obviously Stravinsky and Balanchine, that's a little further down the line. So like after Tchaikovsky, you're getting into, Ballet Russe time a couple decades later. Like what were the working relationships between choreographers and composers like immediately following? Or was it kind of just similar to how it had been?
Yeah, it's so funny because like we have the Stravinsky Balanchine collaborations, but before that it's still Stravinsky, right? Because like Ballet Russe was was where Stravinsky got that started. Prokofiev was like all the French composers were writing for them. But
Right.
Rite of Spring, the so-called, they call it the Russian period for Stravinsky, where he was doing things based off of Russian folklore and everything. But those works with like the orchestration, like Rimsky-Korsakov, like this really huge, lush orchestras. But if you think about the orchestra size, those are huge, huge orchestras. Rite of Spring is one of the largest orchestras you could possibly assemble, right? And, Firebird too, it's really incredibly immense. But, I think that there are stories about some of the choreography for Rite of Spring that were what we were talking about before, where they actually had choreographed it before they could hear the music. And it's like, it doesn't work, right?
Right.
You can see that sometimes too. Petrushka, there are sections that are just, some of the original choreography is really interesting because it makes no reflection on the complexities of the music.
Right.
This like multimedia, time signature section, multimeter section, and the choreography is just them walking in a circle.
Right.
And it's like all these really interesting, complex beats, and that are distorted and whatnot. And I don't think there was an awareness at the time. And so that collaboration, I think that composers and the dance, it depends on the backgrounds of those people, how deep you can get into the music.
Right.
And, when you hear about all these musicians talking about Balanchine's choreography, they say things like, well, it helps me understand the music more, right? And, and really see how beneficial it is for them to be on the same page, to be collegial, and also have the deepest admiration for each other, but then also have enough of a background in each other's art forms, right? The fact that Balanchine had such a musical background that, that Stravinsky loved ballet so much, I think that created those opportunities for these works that are just like, mind-blowing, that are just so famous for all the reasons that we think of, just like, whether it's the neoclassical, like these spiky music of Stravinsky, you wouldn't just like put on its background, but you see the ballet and you're like, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. This music is perfect for this. And the ballet is perfect for the movement. So I think that during that period of time, when you had these huge symphonic works, right? This is, it's one of the richest time periods for orchestral music because you have these great masterworks being created, whether it's in the French school, like all French schools, or, Stravinsky breaking things open. And you still have people like Puccini that are writing very heavily romantic stuff at the same time. I think that it really felt like, people are either creating choreography and then putting it on the music, or just hearing the music and just trying to add on to it. And so it depends, I don't think there is as much of a deep collaboration because it would depend on the people that were involved.
Right. I think that's so interesting that you brought up Petrushka. I just had never even considered that like, the original version that you see in some incarnation, like ballet theater has done it within the past 20 years. I guess, I don't know how recent. I saw it when I was a kid here, but yeah, you're totally right. It's just like, it's very like decorative and not necessarily immersed in the music. And then that just gave me like, I was like, I can't believe like nobody at New York City Ballet has ever tried to like, I wonder why Balanchine wouldn't have touched it. I mean, I guess, he, of course, he says, it's famous, I guess, for allegedly not liking stories, but how many story ballets did he do, and obviously, and always so well. So I would be so curious to know, like, if he just, why he didn't want to do that. But
stayed away from that Russian period because, with Stravinsky, we say there's three periods. We have the Russian period. We have the neoclassical period, right, which is where Apollo, Orpheus, etc., come in play. And then we have the serial period, which is the 12-tone, very Schoenberg, style music where every single note is completely equal. So there's no gravitation to some key or whatnot. But as a result, the music can be a pretty, it's depending on who composes it, it can be very difficult to compose something that actually has a lot of depth to it. Right.
Right.
That's more than an academic exercise, And so it's funny, like you said, Balanchine's the ballets that he did were from the last two periods, but not from the original the Russian period.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I wonder Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I just say, yeah, now you said Petrushka, but I'm thinking, okay, of course, obviously he didn't do Rite of Spring, and then he didn't do Lenos, and yeah, that's all from that early period, right? Like, I wonder, since he respected music so much and often would say, that's why he doesn't compose to Beethoven or Mozart, or infrequently to Mozart, and then Bach, only Concerto Barocco. I wonder if he just thought that music was meant, even though it was composed for ballet, maybe he just wanted you to go hear it in a concert hall.
Yeah, it could be. That's what Concerto Barocco. I mean, it's just a fantastic work because it's like in the 70s, and so the style of playing for sort of Baroque music is different nowadays, and so it's fantastic for musicians because like it's a throwback to a completely different way of approaching music.
Oh, interesting.
Early music, right? Andrew Linton has his great talk about it. It's just he's just like, yeah, it's just like a snapshot of the musical approach to early music at the time. And nowadays, everything is really sort of light and a little bit more virtuosic. And back then in the 70s, a lot of Baroque music was really heavy. It's like Tchaikovsky and like use huge orchestras or huge strings playing in a romantic style. And so specifically the tempi for that are from the 70s, right? It's just a very interesting piece of its era, of its time period.
Is that mostly how that's notated for you guys to know to play it like that? Is it mostly in the tempi, or is there also other notations about, like you're saying, the kind of the dynamics of the way you're playing?
Oh, it's almost everything, and so the thing is that it's not notated in the music. And the hard part about Baroque music is that there are a lot of different approaches and styles to it. And so there are entire, obviously, ensembles that are dedicated to just trying to figure out exactly what the type of sounds are, or the style in which they approach the music. Because, back in Bach's time, they were composing things almost every single week, if not like, every single day. And so musicians would just get the music in front of them for the concert and just be like, okay, let's just do this. But nowadays, because we play in so many different, like hundreds music that ranges obviously hundreds of years, that each styles, in general, there's a more romantic style that most musicians play. And so when we have a piece by Bach or Handel or some of the early composers like Lully, you actually have to spend quite a bit of rehearsal time actually saying, no, for this, we want to make this note shorter. We want this to be lighter. We're going to put a little bit more accent here. We want to have a little bit more breath in the bow or speed or whatnot. And if you're doing something like that's in the style of the 70s, that's much more full sound. With City Ballet and whatnot, they would have, obviously, because they do it so often that they don't have to talk about it. But if they went to a different, besides the tempi, you'd actually have to instruct the orchestra in the stylistic traits specific to that piece.
Sounds like ballet. It's like going from Swan Lake to Balanchine to Justin Peck or whatever, right? It's an era, it's a snapshot in time, and there's like a change through there. When we're talking about Stravinsky, I'm wondering, it's making me think a little bit about like how some of Balanchine's works were initially not well received. Maybe they were too modern and people didn't like them. And then of course they became absolute classics and treasures that we still perform today. What was and he has these three eras you're talking about. What was the reception on his work initially? Because it is neoclassical. It's probably a little more modern for the time. Is that true?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, and it's like we were mentioning, it's just such an explosion of different styles at the time because like if you have Debussy, Ravel, Stravinsky, Puccini, they couldn't be more different in terms of styles of music. But Stravinsky, for the Ballet Russe, Firebird was a big success. And the Rite of Spring, which was only 3 years later, is famous for causing riots, right? Now, again, there's some research to see, that says that it wasn't quite a riot, and some people say it was actually like this huge scandal and whatnot. But some of the stories, like the second act had to have police there, so people didn't, actually, riot or destroy things. One of the stories was that Claude Monteux, who was a conductor for Rite of Spring, they couldn't. The music was over. The shouting and jeering was so loud that the dancers couldn't hear the music, and so people were shouting the counts from the side of the stage so that the dancers could try to forgot where they were.
Yeah.
But Stravinsky ended up hating it for not that he hated the music, but what ended up happening is that after Rite of Spring, everybody loved like a good gossip and story and whatnot, and so they would just compare it to his earlier works, and they said, well, it's fun and it's groundbreaking and stuff, but it wasn't as exciting as Rite of Spring, right? And so he got really annoyed. He's just like, everybody keeps on talking about these like these works that caused riots and whatnot, but I want them just to move on from that, like compose.
Right.
Funny.
Stravinsky was really one of the most influential people. I think even in 1998 or something like that, I just read this recently, like Time magazine said, approaching 2000, the year 2000, that Stravinsky was one of the 100 most influential people of all time during that century. A fantastic. He used to have a little notebook by his bed. He would dream some music and he'd write down the melody when he woke up. Really interesting guy.
Right. Taking care of your skin is an important part of your image, and yet so many don't invest in healthy skincare. Meet Menage. Made in the USA, our products are proven problem solvers and are used by many dancers, as well as those who simply want to have healthy skin and look their very best, whether on stage or off. Formulated with natural botanicals and texture-improving ingredients, our professional-grade skincare and cosmetics are made to withstand hot stage lighting and yet feel and look natural on your skin. Simple to use, our liquid powder shine eliminator keeps skin 100% shine-free, minimizes the appearance of large pores, and delivers uber moisture. Our Urban Camouflage vegan stick concealers cover topical imperfections like dark under-eye circles and skin discoloration, and can be used for dramatic contour application too. Our HDPV anti-shine pressed powders deliver excellent natural-looking coverage to even out skin tone and keep you looking fabulous. Go to www.mensskincare.com. That's men's skincare with one S, and use code COD30 to receive 30% savings on all individual products. Your skin will thank you.
The 10th annual Lake Tahoe Dance Festival will be taking place this summer from July 27th through the 29th at venues in Tahoe City and Truckee, California for in-person audiences. This summer, the Lake Tahoe Dance Festival includes works by George Balanchine, Eric Hawkins, Constantine Becker, and more. Festival artists include friends of the pod Ashley Bowder, Adrian Danchine Waring, Lloyd Knight, and Stephen Hanna. The festival begins on Wednesday, July 27th at 5 p.m. with the 10th anniversary gala opening night celebration, where audiences will enjoy a silent auction with food and wine. The festival's main stage performances continue on July 28th at 6 p.m. in Tahoe City and on July 29th at 6 p.m. on West End Beach, Truckee, California. Tickets on sale now at laketahoedancefestival.org or click the link in the description of this episode. I wonder too, because like for dancers, dancing Stravinsky can be very complex because of the different counts and the structure of the music. So it's a fun challenge, but it's certainly like a challenge. And is that kind of the same for the orchestra, or is that just something that you guys kind of deal with so often and it's on a page in front of you? You have your cheat sheet a little bit.
We have our cheat sheet. We have the music in front of us. And that's one of the things that always astounds me because, pieces like Petrushka or Rite of Spring are so complex, but to have it in your heads, right? Your Posikoff with San Francisco Ballet did our last version of Rite of Spring. And there's this one section where he wants everybody with a stick to mimic the this one rhythm that happens ta-da, 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 ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, like the trumpets and the orchestra just has this this rhythm that is not replicated. So there's no pattern to it. And my favorite part is on stage and in the pit alike, there's always people that messed it up. Like they're like, you're supposed to do two, but they go da 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 crap da da. And so during this, because on stage, Yuri had them actually tapping the stage to the same rhythm. Ta da ta da.
Panic.
You'd hear a crap from either the orchestra or the dancers. During rehearsal, you're just like, oh my god. But that's part of the point. Like it's just like this seemingly random but very that music is incredible. I mean, it's just it's really a fantastic work. The first bassoon solo is this really high note. It's supposed to be like the birth, and nowadays it's used as an audition piece for bassoons because it's a really difficult. But because everybody practices so much and they make it sound beautiful. And Stravinsky says, towards the end of his life and stuff, he's just like, I wish I made it higher because everybody just plays it so well now, and it's not supposed to sound nice, It's like,
it's a birth.
Exactly. And so but it really is. I mean, Rite of Spring is what, like 1913? I mean, Puccini in 1940s wrote like Turandot, like the most romantic, sweet sounding, opera. It's just a crazy time at that time. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's so interesting about Balanchine and Stravinsky's relationship is that, or something we wanted to kind of see if we could glean some extra knowledge about, is that, like you mentioned, he only did a few commissions, like actual commissions, Apollo, Orpheus. Wait, was Apollo even, that was originally with Bound, like, or was that?
That's, I don't think he commissioned that. That was the first.
Right. He didn't commission it. It was just the first time they got to really work together. He did Chant de Rossignol. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
Song of the Nightingale, but Stravinsky didn't work with him on it.
Yeah, that was at the Ballet Russe, and the Chant de Rossignol is music from an opera. There's the first opera that Stravinsky composed, and then they excerpted music out of that. It was just Rossignol, and then the Chant de Rossignol is the orchestral, like, little suite.
Right, but who was the original Apollo choreographer? I can't remember. Obviously, it wasn't as good as Balanchine's. Didn't make the cut. But that was the first time they actually got to work together. And what was well, now I'm getting off track. I missed my prior question. My first question was going to be, what makes it interesting to me is that Balanchine was able to go back into these orchestral works that he loved, the violin concerto, later on Symphony of Three Movements, or things like that were not made for ballet, but he ostensibly could have had a conversation with Stravinsky about these works, and they could have gone into it together. But do we know anything about that? Like, for Symphony in Three Movements, it's such a complex work. Like, do we think that they had conversations during Stravinsky's life about these works?
I'm sure they did, but I think the reason why Stravinsky admired Balanchine so much is that he just had a natural, maybe because of his music background or just because it's brilliant, he would have a natural way of looking at the music, of hearing the music, and then gleaning from it all the things that musicians do to the music, right? Like, we sit there and we look at structure from the very first thing, right? If you're looking at a Mozart symphony, there's inherent structures that are probably going to be like a sonata allegro form or whatever. And when Stravinsky was doing his neoclassical period, like, all these dances actually have very specific forms and everything. But it's like Balanchine understood all of this, and he understood where the phrasings are specifically from, like, a musician's point of view. And so, I think that's why musicians love, Balanchine so much too. Not only that he, tried to treat the music as a whole, not cutting up too much, and keeping the tempos as they are, but that the choreography really matched sort of the character and the style and the inherent structures within the music that we sit there and work on, right? And so, like, when we're looking at a new piece, or as a conductor, when I'm looking at a new piece, you sit there analyzing it in various ways, right? You sit there harmonically, phrase-wise, instrumentation, or whatnot. And then when you see choreography that seems to say, oh, that's fantastic. How did that work? It's just, it's really, I think, brilliant. It's just like he had a deeper understanding of the music, that he was able to create gestures and movements that just sort of emphasized and brought those out. Right. Like Bernstein, when he was conducting, he would say, this Beethoven symphony is amazing, and nobody understands it because, the whole point is that back in the time of Beethoven, they all were expecting a certain structure. And so Beethoven deliberately screws up that structure. So that's why his audiences would have understood. But today's audiences, they listen to everything, so they're not aware of that structure. Mm-hmm. And so Bernstein would take time to actually emphasize those things so it'd be more apparent, right? Mm. That's sort of what it feels like with Balanchine. It's just like he has such a deep understanding of the music that those characteristics that make the music special or make it like brilliant or whatnot, he was able to sort of emphasize those, match those, reflect that. And so what you're seeing really is a depiction of the music itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a deeper level than sometimes you might see, like we were talking about with Petrushka, where they walk around in a circle, but the music's doing all this other random stuff. You're like, wait,
right,
it's not connected at all,
Right.
Yeah.
I love like like in Symphony 3 Movements, I read this somewhere. I don't remember where, so we'll have to fact check this, but that originally the second movement had been Stravinsky had started writing it as a possible accompaniment to the movie Song of Bernadette, and it would be when Bernadette sees a vision of Mary, Virgin Mary. And so like when you listen to that adagio now, it's like you have that, like I can picture that sort of like reverent moment. And it's like, it's not, of course, Balanchine doesn't make anything literal, but it has that sort of like, you could have a feeling of like a revelation, like a or something religious there.
Yeah, I think that's, like they say with Serenade, right? They say with that Balanchine's like, there's no story. It's just
right.
things. But there are certain things where you're just like, but that clearly just evokes this, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And or some sort of gestures that, and I think that's the part that is just so cool about it when you have Stravinsky. It's like, if there's a story behind it, sometimes, he has hidden motivations for what's the rationale for the compositions or whatnot. But then you have Balanchine that sort of brings that out, say like, oh, this, like there's the lyricism there or the sweetness there. I think that, that's part of the fun about, because again, music is more than just the notes on the rhythm. So we tell this to the musicians all the time. It's like our job is to figure out what is the heart of the piece and to emphasize and bring those things out. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's not enough just to play the notes and the rhythms itself. It's just like those go towards something. So if you have something like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, pa 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 pa, it's really aggressive. And that sort of monomania of the one theme that is repeated 200 times, and if you just have lackadaisical performance like, it could be very trite, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have music of Stravinsky, like Firebird is all about the orchestration, extending the techniques, the sort of the storytelling that happens within the ballet, when you have the infernal dance, right towards the end, you have that incredible brass and this driving timpani and basses that are just on this rhythm that just is insistent. Like just playing the music by itself, you can say, okay, that's what it is. But if you have an idea of the story behind it, it's amazing, right?
Right.
And like the shrieks of the Firebird are written into the music, right? And you can, and it's funny because you can talk to orchestras and say, no, that shriek isn't like, it's a little too shrill. It needs to have like power because it's in control at that time, like we actually have conversations about that. But then when Stravinsky gets to the neoclassical period, everything's based off of structure, right? And so your goal is to try to portray the structure in as clear a way as possible to make sure that those, like the architecture of the piece is really important. Or like you're saying for Concerto Barocco, I mean, like, the style of the music is very different. We have to spend a lot of time beyond just the notes and rhythms.
That's interesting hearing about talking about Stravinsky with the structure. It kind of makes you think of the dance, frankly, right? There's no, like in Symphony 3 movements, there's no set, there's no costumes, very limited costumes. It's very, taken down to just the bare minimum. And so is that something that you feel is then reflected in the dance in the same way, like the orchestra's trying to get the same point across as the dance in that way?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Very much. It's just, and I love watching ballet masters, in rehearsal, because sometimes they'll say very similar things that we say to orchestras. They'll say, all the movements are right at the right time, but it's the quality of it that's missing right now. Right.
Right.
And it's just like, like you're either, if it's a story, like this is your motivation for this. So it's that developé has, there has to be some motivation behind it. There's some intention behind it. And so, and so for us, it's exactly the same thing,
When you were talking about that, I was actually thinking that like when you see a dancer that has beautiful technique, you look at it and you're like, oh, I can appreciate that the steps are happening at the right time and well executed. But then if it doesn't have that intention behind it or that, through line that brings it all together, it's just like, oh, okay, that's nice. Like you were saying with the music, that it's just so similar, the art forms. And it's cool to hear you talk about things that we talk about all the time too.
I guess I want to shift. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for Swan Lake, for instance, obviously White Swan, Black Swan, you talk about the character differences, right? But the violin soloist actually has two different solos, right? And so you have the White Swan, Paduda has the beautiful violins, and then Black Swan is a completely different character. And so for the violinists, they actually have that same transformation and difference of approach to their solos, because that's also, their job too,
Sure.
Right. That's so fun to think of. I never would have put that together.
Yeah.
Now that we've gone through kind of these two super iconic choreographer composer relationships, I just wanted to have, I guess, a look into what that model is like today. I guess I'm thinking like Justin Peck has worked a lot with Sufjan Stevens, and you have
Marsden you brought up, which I was thinking too.
Right. So, I'm curious, has that dynamic shifted, do we think, in the 21st century? Or the collaborative methods? Like what are some factors in today's modern world that might change things from how Tchaikovsky and Petipa worked, for instance?
I think that a lot, obviously there's music that's been is used for ballet, that's set work like we were talking about, and then music that's composed specifically for new ballets or whatnot. But nowadays I think that there is a really wonderful connection between composers and choreographers. Really sort of that intimate level where they're talking about sort of the structures, the intent behind the music. Speaking of Lola Rubin, for his Frankenstein, we did. There's this one scene, a gypsy scene, a tavern scene, and the music just wasn't correct, right? Mm-hmm. And so he was asked just to compose a completely new scene and say, no, this needs to be more in the style of Carmen. And Lowell's just like, okay, sounds great. Well, let me. You guys want something that sounds like Carmen and that has a sort of that energy to it. Right. That's exactly what I'll do. Sufjan Stevens, like we did in Countess of Kings, we just recently did a few years ago, and that was orchestrated for the orchestra to play, and it's just a fantastic work. But the musicians, there's this one nasty trumpet solo, and the trumpet player is just like, yeah, this is great, but this is pretty hard.
Yeah.
But I think that it just depends. There's what I'm seeing like a lot nowadays is a lot of composers. A lot of choreographers have a lot of different influences, because we listen to Bach, we listen to Sufjan Stevens, we listen to Metallica, we listen to Beatles or whatnot. There's a lot of mixing of genres,
right.
And there are still obviously the sort of large realms of either minimalistic music and people just compose on top of that, or these more contemporary music that people are sort of adapting for the stage and orchestra to play. But this idea of these combinations of a lot of things is kind of fun. It sort of represents where we are, I think, musically and as a culture, because we have so many different. We have the luxury of being able to listen to music from so many different eras.
Right.
And I just wonder, from the pit, what are their musicians really enjoying, and you enjoying conducting right now? Do you love to hop back in time and go to Tchaikovsky? Are you loving some Stravinsky, or do you like these kind of new commissions? Is that something that's especially interesting to you?
For me, new commissions are always fun, because when you have new music, it's like you're seeing it for the first time and you get to explore it. When you're approaching pieces like Tchaikovsky, it's the orchestrations are so gorgeous. The melodies are so amazing. The range of emotions, of color, of dynamics, everything. The orchestra, this is San Francisco Ballet, just finished Swan Lake. So that was the last program for their season until next season. And the orchestra's been looking forward to that forever, They absolutely love it. It's just a fantastic, fantastic score. It's like, Prokofiev, the ballets for Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet, it just one of the favorite. Cinderella, right? It's just fantastic works. So in the orchestra, sometimes minimalistic music, if we're doing the same thing for like 30 minutes in a row, there's a mental fatigue that's there, right? And I remember this one work had so many mixed meter, and you're just intently counting the entire time. And I'm sure it's the same with dance too. If you're just like focusing on counting, then the sort of musicianship, the artistic aspect is a little harder to do. And so that was a very hard thing to connote. But I mean, like, it's also really fun. I don't think there's not many times where I don't enjoy conducting, right? Yeah, I don't. There's certainly music that we enjoy for different reasons, and there's certainly music that's a little less intense, right? Yeah.
All right.
That's a political way of saying it.
We love everybody. We love everybody and everything. No, but that's, I mean,
it makes sense. I mean, it's the same for dance,
Right. Yeah. You get to go through all these different musical journeys as part of what makes conducting ballet exciting, I imagine. So
yeah, but like for ballet, especially because you have different casts and everybody's different on like the physical requirements for the dancers are so great that, there are going to be slight differences from night to night. That's what for us is really exciting, because sometimes you get in a symphony hall, for instance, the idea from some musicians that you just want to set a certain version of a performance of the music and just kind of do it, right? And there's less spontaneity, there's less sort of in the moment, musicianship and phrasing, or things are a little, I wouldn't call it stale, but it's a little less, predictable.
Right.
Especially if you have like 8 of those things in a row and you just want to do the same thing every single time. It just,
right.
To me, is not as invigorating as if you were, on stage and you have different people that are requiring different tempi, that are requiring different phrasings, or even the same people that are just saying, second time, the first, any nerves I might have had in the first performance are gone. So the tempi change,
Right.
So I mean, like, ballet conducting is fantastic because, that spontaneity is there. And when things really line up, when things just match and everything goes well, it's so thrilling,
I saw that you posted recently about Sasha DeSola, who's a friend of the pod. We had her on, and she was doing Swan Lake, doing Odette O'Deal, and you posted something so lovely that was like, I remember when you joined the company, I knew you would, were capable of this, or something so nice like that. And so I wonder what that also means for you as a conductor, to kind of watch these dancers really grow, and then be able to work. Of course, in Odette O'Deal, you work with them closely. You discuss these tempos like you're talking about. So what does that kind of like mean to you?
Oh, it's so fantastic. The hard part, obviously, about dance is that the careers are shorter than musicians, right? And so, when I started guesting with San Francisco, Sasha was core member, but she always is so, she's like a workaholic. She just really is in it all the time and trying to grow and to develop and explore and everything. And so, I was there, she was injured for a little while, and I remember I was conducting, and, all of us felt just like, horrified. And when she was first promoted to soloist and then promoted to principal, and so this was her first Swan Lake, even though she's actually been principal for a while, we've actually many other ballets and whatnot. But the excitement that she has, obviously for one of the greatest works in ballet, and the amount of research and the preparation she did, the process became really fun, because she would just say, listen, I just want to try this. I would love this. This is what I'm going for. This is what I'm going to try to do. I know it's a slight deviation, but let's see how it works. And so, being part of that process in the studios as we're experimenting, figuring out how things work. Obviously the fouettes, everybody does completely different. Some people do like 1-1-2. Some people just do all 2s. Some people do all 1s, whatever. Yeah. But, everybody was trying to figure out their own version of it. And for her, she was like, it took her, I think it was like 1 week beforehand, where she's like, no, this is what I'm going to do.
Well, she's a wild turner, so I'm sure she did something wild out there.
So she did straight singles the entire time singles.
But rock solid, I'll betcha.
Completely rock solid. But it's also, it's like, I imagine the power, it's not the power, but the strength needed for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's just so and of course she likes to, she's a fast spinner too. So she it's because, you know, it's also Swan Lake. The ballet is obviously and the orchestra has performed it many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
So they have an idea of the range of tempi. And so when I first did Sasha's tempo, you know, they're just like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Really fast. This is really fast. And I'm like, no, seriously. This is what she wants. And it's so exciting, you know? I just, you know, I have the utmost respect for her because, again, she is always in it, you know, during this pandemic, you know, she's like, listen, if I got sick and I had to miss some of the season that we're performing, it would be devastating. Yeah. So I'm just going to focus on, you know, being in the studio, being careful as possible, really trying to ensure that I have all the opportunities in this short career that, you know, that we're lucky to have. Right. And so, you know, I love her so much. We've done so many collaborations, and, you know, to do Swan Lake, which means so much to her, it means so much to us. It was great to be like actual partners, you know, and to be part of that as well. You know, like as tight as like Balanchine or Stravinsky or whatnot, just felt like we were working together, trying to collaborate in a much more intimate way than just like, "Hey, was the tempo okay? Oh no, okay, well, let me try to, you know, how about it, whatever." She's great.
Collaboration continues, huh?
Yeah.
And it was a premiere for a lot of them because, you know, we had four couples this time, and so it's great.
Fun.
I love that. What a perfect way to end this, because it's like that we all rely on one another so much in what we do. It's not just an independent operation. You know, all of these things would fall apart if they didn't have the other collaborators on board. So
and just like we were talking about Stravinsky and Balanchine, it's like so much richer and it's so much more satisfying experience when you see the fruits of the collaboration, that they were so, you know, tight and had respect for each other. And, you know, sometimes, and I'm sure on stage, some dancers get worried about the music, or the musicians, the stereotype is just like, oh, the dancers are like, you know, messing around with the tempi and whatnot. But likewise, when you're working on the same page and you're collaborating and you're really trying to work together through the process, I think that the results, it's a higher potential for these really satisfying performances. And so, you know, that was a great way to end the season, I think, for us. I see Sasha's been posting all her vacation pics.
Vacation time. Well, thank you so much, Ming. We really, really appreciate it. We had so much fun last time. We had so much fun this time. We're sure we'll have you back on in the future. Whatever you let us know, something interesting that you'd like to talk about. You're here.
It's always great chatting with you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.